Welcome to the Sustainable Travel Podcast. I'm Emma, your host from That Travel. This is a podcast that interviews a range of different travelers from different backgrounds to see what sustainable travel means to them. And today I am here with Renee Bruns, who is a Guinness World Record holder who's traveled to 144 countries as a wheelchair user. She focuses on cultural travel and meeting local communities, and we're here today to talk about the intersection of sustainability and accessibility. Hi, Renee.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
You are so welcome. I'm really excited to have you here. It's going to be a great episode, I think.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. So I think that we've had just yesterday, actually, I interviewed Kirsten from the Autistic Traveler. And I think that's going to be the first of a few episodes that we're going to have about accessibility and different disabilities, whether they be invisible, wheelchair users, that kind of thing, versus sustainability. Yeah, so it's going to be quite an interesting kind of deep dive into how it all affects different people.
Perfect. I love it.
Yeah. So, Renee, in your own words, can you tell us a little bit about you, who you are, and how you got into all the traveling that you do?
Yeah, for sure. So I was born in Ohio, in a rural town in the United States, and I was born with a rare skeletal disorder. So when I came out of the womb, no one knew that this disorder was a part of who I am, and so there was this mad search for to figure out what was going on with me. There were some clear deformities with my legs and my feet specifically. So my parents set out on this journey to figure out what this diagnosis was that I had and what kind of treatments were available. And that really launched me into the beginnings of my travel. So coming from this very small town, most people don't leave, most people stay, and everybody's kind of the same, and they just go about their lives, and everyone's very, very happy with that. But we had to find a medical team that could help us, and we didn't know where to do that. And when I say we, I mean my parents, because I was a
Oh,
child.
baby.
Yeah, exactly. Didn't even know this was happening, but they started going to places like Baltimore, Maryland, and Boston and New York City. And as I started to get to a point where I would have these memories of going to places like New York City, I just got really excited about the culture and a city like New York City has so many different ethnicities, so many people from around the world, so many languages and foods, and you understand
Yeah.
everything. Such a melting pot. And I was just so in awe with it. So I often say that the silver lining to my disability, with all its challenges and struggles and everything that comes with it, the silver lining is the fact that I started seeing the world at such a young age and really started traveling and had this draw. So, pretty young, I realized I liked traveling. And then when I was around third grade, I was studying the US geography in school, and I came home and told my mom, I want to go see all 50 states. And she kind of just, supportive of her little girl, was like, yeah, I think you should do that. But, we grew up in a small town again where people don't really do that.
Yeah.
So she was like, sure, you should do that. And then by the time I graduated college, I had been to all 50 states. And then it was, well, what now? And so I took a trip to Europe, took a trip to Asia, took a trip to Africa, and it spiraled from there. So I really started falling in love with travel. And then when I was post-pandemic around 2022, I had been working in corporate America for 20 years. And like so many other people, just had a reflection of what my life was going to look like for the second half and said, I have enjoyed my time in corporate America, but time for the next chapter. And left my corporate job and set out on what was supposed to be a 1 year trip around the world, just to self-discover, reflect, have a lot of fun. And through that, I visited 66 countries with me in my wheelchair, and I received the Guinness World Record for visiting that many countries in 1 year. And now my life is kind of launched into something completely different than what I ever expected, which is a really beautiful thing. And I get to work in the travel advocacy space. I'm still traveling a lot. And my new goal is to visit all of the countries in the world. So I've expanded my goal from 50 states to 195 countries.
I love that. That's definitely a goal that I can see you achieving.
I hope so. It's going to be difficult, but I hope so.
I'm sure you can do it. Do you travel alone?
I do some of both. I have been, I would say about half of the countries I visited so far, and I've been to 144. About half of those countries I've done solo, and half I've done with family or friends.
Mhm.
It's really interesting. There are places well, I shouldn't even say it's interesting. There are places in the world that other people don't really want to go to.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of go on my own. But then there are also places in the world that are difficult for a wheelchair user to go on their own. And so I'm fortunate I have family that wants to go to some deep places in Africa that are not super accessible or accessible at all, and they're willing to help me. So I'm really, really lucky in that aspect.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, the year where you visited 66 countries, I think even like for anybody, that is quite a feat. And then to do that with a wheelchair as well, I'm not surprised you won the Guinness World Record, let me just say.
Thank you. I was tired afterwards. I was very, very tired.
Yeah, I bet you were exhausted. Like, I mean, we went traveling for 6 months in Africa as well, my husband and I think that in the course of that, we maybe visited about 18, 19, maybe 20 countries, and we were wiped, like seriously done. So 66, like no.
Yeah, you have to be, and I will say I'm starting to touch into Africa. I've kind of saved that whole continent for last, knowing it would be hard. I think Africa is especially hard, and there's
I
just
mean,
there's a lot of nuances to visiting Africa. But I will tell you, when I found out I was in the running for the Guinness World Record, I was very strategic about where I wanted to go and what would be easy to get in and out of. A lot of the little islands in the Caribbean and the South Pacific, I didn't want to spend
yeah.
3 months in one place. So there's a lot of strategic planning with it.
I mean, I would imagine that it probably like spurs you on a little bit when you know that you're in the running. You're like, right, I'm gonna do this now.
100%, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think it's amazing that you did it. And I love hearing kind of your whole story as well. Thank you for sharing that with us and like being so open. It's I mean, I love that your parents were so passionate about this and kind of took you everywhere. And then it had this result of you being so interested in travel.
Yeah, I don't even, at the time, and I'm sure they didn't know it either. At the time, it was all focused on this medical journey of let's find some treatment. What's going on here? What does the rest of her life look like?
Mhm.
And, 40 years later, we all look back on it and say, wow, what a cool, ironic journey that we all went on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how you said when you went to New York, that was when the turning point was for you. Do you know how old you were in New York?
I was about 5 years old.
That's amazing that you had that like cognition at 5 years old. I don't think I would have.
Oh, I know. I don't, again, I don't think I even realized it until I got, recent years. But looking back on it, there were some very clear, I can picture like the building in the 80s and the taxis and, just different things that they're very vivid to me. And so it is kind of cool to have that silver
Yeah.
lining, as I call it.
Yeah, and I suppose like if we can give it another silver lining, it's like it also got your parents traveling as well. And maybe that's one of the reasons why they're so interested in traveling with you now and other members of your family are too.
Absolutely. I have three siblings, and I will tell you, they are all equally as venturous as I am. So whether it was me or the family, maybe it's just in the blood, who
Yeah.
knows?
Travel obsessed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I really do like that as well. Um, and like the reason you and I kind of got chatting is we were saying that obviously sustainable travel in itself is quite difficult. When you add into that the complexities of then having a wheelchair with you and kind of needing to use that wheelchair, it then becomes even more complicated. So, can you explain a little bit about that for us? Like, what additional considerations do you need to make when it comes to accessibility versus sustainability? And yeah, can you give us a little bit more information there?
Yeah, so I have been thinking about this for the past couple weeks since we first chatted, and it's a really interesting question to answer because I like to think of myself as a sustainable person, and I'm constantly thinking about what can I do from a sustainability standpoint, especially with the environment when you get out and you start getting to places in Africa or some of the islands and you realize that they don't have the resources that we do.
Yeah,
And then I started thinking, well, how does this intersect with someone who uses a wheelchair? How does this impact my life? And I couldn't really put my finger on it. And then I really again, I've been mulling over this for a while and it came to me a couple days ago. When it comes to having accessibility, that will always outweigh any sort of sustainability.
hmm,
And I think that's just natural. So being able to use a toilet or being able to get into a building, if I have the option of not using a toilet and it being sustainable or using a toilet, my natural gut response is to use the toilet. I'm not even thinking about sustainability at that point. So it's a really interesting thing. And how do you weigh that? And I think there are just for someone using a wheelchair or that has medical needs, all of those medical needs are just going to completely erase the thought of sustainability when it really comes down to it.
Yeah, I think this is so true. I think when you get like to the nitty gritty, and this is true of anybody, if it's like, right, survival versus sustainability, we're human, like we need to choose the option that is either like going to help us survive and thrive kind of thing, or is just like there are basic needs that we have as humans. It's like we need to be able to get access to food, we need to be able to get access to the toilet, to sleep. And if you can't do those things comfortably or to a point where you're okay, traveling's uncomfortable anyway. So you really need to be able to have those basic needs met as a human, right?
Exactly, exactly. I think of it maybe you are exactly right. And an example that you could break down for just an average traveler is on a day-to-day basis, we need to have water. So in much of the world, Africa, for example, you can't usually drink the water right out of the faucet, out of the sink. So you're resorting on bottled water. I often like to find as big of a bottle of water that I can and refill my reusable water bottle so I don't have plastic bottles just floating all over.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if the only option is to buy teeny tiny bottles of water, I will buy 20 of those so that I can survive.
Yeah.
And so I think that the average traveler would say the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
You might look to see if there's a bigger bottle, but at the end of the day, to your point, you have to survive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think what it is as well is like there are different needs that say you have as a wheelchair user than someone who's able-bodied might have
Mhm.
that just can't like they don't mesh with sustainability. There's this like kind of clash. Like for example, having an accessible space such as a hotel, it may not be possible for you to go to a guest house that is smaller, that's more sustainable, an eco-friendly place. Like, what if they have steps everywhere? Like, what are
Uh-huh.
you supposed to do?
Right, right, right. Well, I think also, and I'll just say an unfortunate reality because I don't want to dwell on the negative, but there are a lot of experiences in the world that involve some of those eco-friendly places, like, like tree houses, or you go out into the
Yeah,
jungle and you stay there, and I just cannot do them. And
no,
so my option is to go into a town or a city and stay at a place with electricity and running water. And, so there is kind of outweighing that, but it all goes back to surviving, as you said.
yeah. And when we come to things as well, like you just made a really good point there that kind of made me think is like when you're traveling, you might have to look at cities and so on. You couldn't necessarily rely on the likes of public transport because in places in rural Africa, for example, probably not going to have a ramp. Like it's just not.
Correct.
It's not like as we've said. I have done quite a bit of traveling in Africa, and it has crossed my mind multiple times while being there. Like, how would this be possible for a wheelchair user?
Yeah, it's not. That's how,
Yeah.
well, I shouldn't say that because I'm doing a lot of it and I want to see the rest of Africa. I think it is possible with human beings, and the people around the world are incredibly helpful. So it
Yeah.
is possible. It's hard though. It's really hard, and it's not possible to see everything. And I think anyone with a disability will say, I might not be able to see that, but at least I can see this, or at least I hope that's where people with disabilities land, because I think it is important to recognize that I can't do everything, but if I get to Africa and I get to see part of it, that is still better than not seeing any of it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I don't really think of it, like you said, you don't want to dwell on the negatives, but I also do think it's important to kind of like be realistic for people here. Like we're explaining that because there will be some of our listeners who are also wheelchair users, but there's going to be quite a lot who aren't, and they maybe aren't aware of these issues. So I do apologize to the listeners for starting on what might seem like a negative, but it's just to explain, this is what we're looking at when it comes to this intersectionality.
Yeah, it's a reality. And I think, yeah, you can say negative. But I think it is also a reality. And I say this a lot to people. I can't do a lot of things, or if I do them differently.
Yeah.
But I also get to see the world from a very unique lens. I don't think many people get to see it from, and that is experiencing the people around the world and the way that they step up and help.
Mm.
And in places of the world that are less traveled, it's so fascinating how human beings have this innate being within them to say, this person needs help up these two stairs. I'm just going to help them. And And culturally, where I'm, I come from the Western world where people are saying, you can't get up those stairs, you better go find a ramp. That's not my problem. And you get to other parts of the world and people are just saying, oh my gosh, this person needs some help. We must help. And
Yeah.
it's really interesting to see how human beings just innately want to be there for each other.
Yeah, I think that's lovely. And
Yeah.
it's not a case of like in your case in particular, I know some people, but it doesn't hold you back. It's just find a workaround,
Yeah.
find a different way of doing it. And I think when we talk about sustainability, from my world at least, there's often a lot of people who have this like able-bodied privilege and lots of other privileges as well, who maybe don't consider when they're giving out their tips, like actually I'm not really speaking to a global audience here. I'm speaking to the people who look like me, who think like me, who have access to the same things I have access
Hmm.
to. And we do need to be mindful that there's a lot of people who want to travel who don't look like the people we see on Instagram, who don't look like that at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even say that applies to me in my own conversations and conversations
Yeah.
like this because the spectrum of disabilities is large
Yeah.
and there is no disability that is exactly the same as the next one. And so for me to sit here and say this is my experience, the other disabled passenger or other disabled listeners might say that's so not applicable to me, and that's okay. Everyone has their own story.
Yeah.
But I also I caution myself too, and I tread lightly because I can't know everyone's story. It's impossible.
Yeah, there's like I think we even said this before we came onto the show like a couple of weeks ago.
Uh-huh.
We could do interviews about the intersection of disability and sustainability for 2 years or so. Like
Yeah.
and we are going to be interviewing like a range of different people as well, because I think that's so important to say, like no one here is this like monolith. Like
Yeah.
it's not like, okay, now we've covered disability. Like there's too many.
It's yes, exactly. It's impossible. And I think for me, as I've done my travel and continue to do my travel, I pick up on tips and tricks from a variety of disabled travelers and able-bodied travelers. And so
Yeah.
I think it's just capturing those little snippets of information that work for you. And if what I say doesn't work for somebody, then I mean, no hard feelings. I can't know everyone's stories or challenges.
No, but I mean, having been to 144 countries, like you've got a
Yeah.
good grasp
Thanks.
on what works.
Thanks.
Um, so when we talk about sustainable travel, and we again, this is different for everybody. Like sustainable travel really does mean that's what this whole show is about. So you focus more on culture, I guess, and people. So what does it mean to you? What's that phrase? When I say that, what does that bring up in your head?
So I think that sustainability is something in the Western world that we kind of all have a similar view of, and we think we understand it, myself included. I think I understand it. But I think as we start traveling into more remote places of the world, less traveled places in the world, places where the ideologies are just different, I think we start to see, at least I have started to see sustainability in a different sense. And it's easy for me to escape some of the impacts of not having sustainability. And I can throw some money at the problem and run away if there's a tornado or a fire or a flood. And there are parts of the world where people can't do that for financial reasons, for geographic reasons. I'll tell a story about when I was in Kiribati. So Kiribati is a little island in the South Pacific. Their highest altitude is 3 feet, so about a meter above water. And they have a lot of pollution. They have a lot of plastic, a lot of like plastic bottles, water bottles,
Mhm.
and they don't have a lot of place to put them because this island is very small. So they pile them up on the coast, compact them very tightly, and then they go out into the ocean, they get some sand, and they put sand on top of these plastic bottles, and they build their homes on
Wow.
top of this. And it's right there on the coast of the water. It's beautiful. You would never know that there's plastic bottles underneath it. But this is how their homes are built. And when you sit and talk with the locals about what climate change means to them, they talk about, and very jokingly, but it's also very real for them, they talk about when the next tsunami comes in and they no longer have a country. And they talk about whether they'll live in Fiji or New Zealand, who's going to take them in. And again, they say this all very lightheartedly, but it's becoming a reality for them that their country is not going to exist in 20 to 30 years.
Yeah.
So I think when I think about sustainable travel, I think there's a huge opportunity for people to learn by going into some places like this. And again, this is one little island country. There's, how many dozens of countries that are being impacted. But to hear firsthand from the people how it's impacting their lives and how they can't just escape it. And that's really meaningful for me. And then to bring that information back to other people and how do you help countries like that just don't have the resources?
Yeah. I had a similar experience in Fiji, actually. I met a guy from Tuvalu, which is an island nation that is going to be not in existence in 50 years. And it's really sobering. Like, I don't think that's something that we in the global north can comprehend. Like, it's wild. Like, it's not just that they're like, okay, the landmass will not exist, but also their culture, everything they've built thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, is is just gone. Like, and that's I don't think we can sum that up. Like,
No, it's exactly. And I have not been to Tuvalu yet. It's obviously on my list, but I'm assuming you had a similar experience where the people just, it's their reality. So they're not like walking down the street crying about the
no.
future of their country. This is just, it's their reality.
Hmm.
And they've kind of accepted it.
Yeah, but they're very action focused. I found like it was really inspiring for me. I mean, I wasn't in Tuvalu, I was in Fiji. But in Fiji, they're obviously one of the largest island nations in the Pacific, and they were looking at the whole thing of like, right, well, we have to house however many people are coming across from Tuvalu, however many people are coming across from Kiribati. Like, it's really they are also going to be impacted in this way because then they have to take in these well, you call them immigrants, but like displaced people,
Hmm.
and they have to accommodate their culture with their own. That's very challenging for them, and they're looking at all of this from a very global perspective of how do we stop climate change. And then you look at what we're doing in the global north, and like it's a little bit embarrassing.
Absolutely, it is. It's embarrassing, and I really appreciate what you said about the culture and Fiji saying, we're going to have all of these different cultures coming into this island. And yes, comparatively, Fiji is a big island, but it's still a little teeny tiny island compared to the rest of the world.
Yeah,
And when I was in Kiribati, it's probably similar to what you experienced in your conversations. It was, well, where do I want to go? Do I want to go to New Zealand or do I want to go to Fiji?
yeah.
And the people were saying, well, Fiji will probably be the most culturally similar. And I just think about like having that conversation with your family. Where do we want to go? What's going to be the closest to home for us and how difficult that is. And I, it is embarrassing to know that I live in a place where we contribute so much to that. And so kind of circling back to your point about what is sustainable travel, I think for me, it's obviously trying to do everything I can to travel in a sustainable manner, but I think there's also a huge educational component that comes with it.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a really good answer that I haven't really considered before either. I always say that. I like every time somebody gives me an answer, I'm like, wow, that's so like different from what everyone else said. But it's true. It's like it's all really connected and interconnected when you look at it that way. That yes, it's about climate change. That's why people always say, sustainability, the environment, this and that. But in the same vein, like climate change affects culture, affects people and livelihoods and just everything. Like it's all really intertwined, and there's no one way to define it.
Right, right.
You know?
It's a complex idea.
It's extremely nuanced, and there are a lot of people who I think find it difficult to understand this concept that culture and communities are part of sustainable travel.
Mhm.
But for me, they really, really are, and I know for you as well.
100%. I think it's a huge part of it for sure.
Yeah, because you always try and kind of talk to people when you're traveling as well, don't you? And like,
Oh, it's my favorite part. I
yeah,
will I will skip the monument and the fancy church or the mosque and the the history of it all if I can sit down and chat with a local person for several
That's
hours.
I'm
Yeah.
literally like that. And my husband's like, okay, we've got to like go here and here. And I'm like, can we just like, watch these people and chat with these people and have
Yeah.
conversations? It's yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you learn so much. I mean, not to divert the conversation, but you learn so much about a culture by talking with a local person and how are they raising their kids? What do they have for breakfast? What does their
Yeah.
day-to-day look like? I mean, it's those silly little things, but you also realize how much alike this whole world is, despite all its differences and all the hate that's going on out there. There is so much love and kindness, and people are so much more alike than we even realize.
Yeah, and also for me, some of the conversations that you have on those levels, like it's really a way to immerse yourself in the culture and understand, like, so if, for example, if I'm in like Burundi and I chat to someone on a bus in Burundi about how they do things at home, blah, 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 then I know, right, like this is the way they do things, like this is how I'm going to conduct myself. It's actually very useful.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And it's fun to be one of them for the period of time that you're there, if you can even say that, to embrace that cultural experience.
Well, I really do think that we should not be looking to be them, but like we should be looking to travel as much like locals as we can, because
Hmm.
in that way we minimize our footprint. We also get, involved with, because a lot of the problems with like over tourism, mass tourism at the moment, they come from the idea that tourists have come over, not understood the culture, just kind of breezed through, like
Hmm.
left their mess and then off they've gone.
Yep.
And in my opinion, really the way to combat that is to get involved, is to learn, to be open-minded, and to have these conversations that stop you doing that.
Yeah, 100%. And also, it's really fun to do that too.
Yeah, it is. It's like some of my best experiences have just been sitting and having those moments where
Yeah.
people really open up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I was in Ghana recently and um we had a driver and a guide bringing us around and he said, "Okay, we're going to go to this museum next. We're going to go here." And we said, "Can we just go try the local food? We don't care about this museum. We don't care about this monument. Like, we care, but we're more interested in trying the food." So he brought us to a local restaurant. Like there were no other Westerners in this restaurant. And we sit down and they bring the food and he says, "All right, go ahead." And we're like, "Well, there's no silverware here." And he said, "No, no, you use your hands." So you
Yeah.
just like dig in. And we had so much fun. He taught us all about the food, about why they eat with their hands. And we were in there just like totally embracing it. And
Yeah.
it's such a cool memory.
And often the guides I find in those situations, they like, when you say a local restaurant, they're
Uh-huh.
like, okay, but not a real local restaurant. It's like, no,
Right.
no, please take me
Yeah.
to the
Yeah. Yeah.
most local.
Yes, exactly. I want to be the only person that looks like me in that restaurant because I want to see it and feel it and experience all of it.
Yeah, exactly. That
Yeah.
really is the best bit of it, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, okay, so I want to talk about the Guinness World Record here.
Sure.
So you said you visited 66 countries, and you also said that you kind of were strategic about how you did them. So can you tell us like how you did it and what were some of the kind of positive experiences and challenges that came out of that?
Yeah, sure. So I left my job in May. It was 2022. So the Guinness World Record took 1 year. I left in May. Did not really, that wasn't my intent, I was not chasing a Guinness World Record when I left. I went to Bali. That's where I started. It was my first solo trip, I mean, internationally at least. So Bali was a perfect place for me to start doing that. But I, again, was not chasing the Guinness World Record. I had messaged Guinness probably about a month or two before I left. I was doing a lot of research about solo travel and about disability travel, and I was not finding a lot of information about solo disability travel. So I thought, well, people aren't doing this. Maybe there's a record in this. But so I emailed Guinness. And again, this was not my sole intent. I was just like, oh, this will be kind of something fun. It took a few weeks, maybe even a couple months after I started traveling, that they came back and said, okay, we're going to open this record for most countries visited in 1 year using a wheelchair. I had known before I heard back from them that I would have to be tracking where I was, how I got there, plane tickets, train tickets, where, receipts from hotels or restaurants. I knew I would have to have proof of where I was. So I was quietly tracking all of that stuff. I mean, so much is electronic. So all my plane tickets were in my email anyway, and all my receipts and stuff. But I was kind of keeping quiet log of all of that. And I was traveling around Southeast Asia. So I went to the Philippines, went to Malaysia, went to Indonesia, obviously, Singapore, some of the Southeast Asian countries. And then I heard back from them and they said, okay, we're going to open this. And I thought, okay, now I could go to a place like India where I could spend months just immersing myself in the culture. Or I can go to a place like the Marshall Islands where I really don't need more than a few days to experience the island. So I became pretty strategic about, I did all of the Caribbean islands, which I had not been to before. So that was about 10 or 14 countries. Then I went to the South Pacific and did a lot of those countries, so like the Marshall Islands, Kiribati, Tuvalu, and Nauru were not open at the time because of COVID. So I did not get to those, but Fiji, those islands. And so I was able to get a number of smaller countries that I wanted to visit all of them anyway, but that really helped me to ramp up the numbers.
Yeah.
And then Guinness, they will count a country if you, I mean, even if I had been to it before Guinness, but like I had been to France many, many times. So I had a layover there and that counted as a country. So I had some unique opportunity to get in there, but I was really strategic about it. And um, I would say that's how I did it. I was also on the go. It was constant, constant, constant. I was not working while I was doing this. I was not doing any other side projects. I was full on traveling, like in the moment. My spare time was spent planning the next couple months of my trip. So it was exhausting. It was amazing. I did a lot of it solo, and that was,
Wow.
there's advantages and disadvantages to that, especially using a wheelchair. There are times where you want people with you to help you. But at the same time, you can just go and you don't have to worry about someone saying, I want to rest today. Or it
Yeah.
was because I was getting this Guinness. My sister, my mom wasn't. And so I had the adrenaline kind of pushing me.
Amazing. Okay, wow, that's like really, really cool. So I'm super interested in this, like for a few things that you said. So obviously I know that how much you love the culture, and it was really interesting to hear you make that comparison between you didn't want to go to India because you knew that you'd need like loads of time there to really get involved and soak that up. So how did you deal with a lot of this like jumping from place to place? Did you find you were still able to experience a lot of culture in that way, or is it more that you'd go back to those places?
I compare it to a tapas restaurant, the little like appetizers. And I often say I got a little flavoring of all of these different countries. And just because I've been to Malaysia does not mean I don't want to go back. It does not mean I want to spend more time or don't want to spend more time there. And so I was on the move, and yes, I did a lot of the little island countries. There are some that I want to go back to, and some
Yeah.
that I want to spend
Mm.
weeks visiting. And then there are others where I feel like I got my experience, what I personally needed. And I think that that varies for everybody on an individual level.
Yeah.
But as I was going through it, it was an opportunity of course, checking off the country for Guinness and, for saying I've been there. But I'm 40, I've got a lot of life left. And so
Yeah.
for me to say I'll never go back to Indonesia is an ignorant statement in my book.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think when we think about, firstly, you were doing it for your world record, so that's a little bit different. But there's a lot of times when travelers in general can look at something and think, well, I just want to like go everywhere. I want to tick everywhere off. But you don't always actually get to experience the best the country has to offer when you do that.
Correct. I
Yeah.
agree. I agree. And I think everybody has different things that they're looking for when they're traveling. The checklist of, okay, I've been there. That's great. I have a stamp on my passport. No judgment for those. I'm doing a lot of that myself. So there's no judgment whatsoever.
Mm.
I think that people that do that and get to see X number of countries are often going to say, I really liked my time in Ecuador. I want to go back there and I want to spend some time. And that's great because had you not gone and done that checklist item, you might not know that you want to go to Ecuador and spend more time there. So I don't think there's a right or wrong way to experience it. As long as you're getting something out of it,
Mm.
I mean, that's great.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I think as someone who definitely understands that FOMO, sometimes people do really need to just do that initial like breeze through. Not saying it's the most sustainable way, of course, but like if that's what they choose to do and then they go back and really do immerse and spend their time there, then I can totally understand that.
Yeah, I know, and I would also say, agreed, it's not sustainable. That I 100% agree with that. But on the flip side, if you are learning something from it and you're bringing that back and bettering the world because of what you learned while you were there, then I mean, that's amazing.
And well, also just to say, it can be sustainable. Like it really does depend how you do it. Like there are people who do that kind of thing all over land, and like the way you did, where they'll immerse themselves in the culture as much as they can and kind of listen to people. Like I think so often we look at like, well, this person flew a lot and they visited a lot of countries, they're not sustainable. But actually, when you look at like the global carbon footprint, the aviation industry is only making up 4%. So like I'm not saying we should all stop flying everywhere, but it's actually a comparatively minimal part of being sustainable.
100%, 100%. And I think I mean, the list goes on, but what are you doing to advocate for better sustainable practices outside of travel? Even in your
Yeah.
day-to-day life, people have, at least in the US, they have these big homes and they have multiple cars and, the list goes on and on. So there are ways to offset what you're doing. And to your point, the aviation industry is a very small percentage of the global problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying just like take jets everywhere, but like,
Yeah, no, 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 no. Exactly, exactly. Yeah,
yeah, I
totally.
don't I don't want to be misconstrued on that and have people quote me as like sustainable for life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a fine line.
It is, it is. No, it's definitely true. And I think the way that you did it is very interesting how you got some that were kind of layovers and like stopovers, just went out and got the passport stamp and that sort of thing. And to do that solo, like I'm super impressed by this, honestly. That must be challenging as a wheelchair user.
It is, and I mean, yes, but I would also, and I don't know, again, this is such a hard thing to say because there's so many spectrums of disabilities and people need help in different aspects in different
Yeah.
ways, but this is also my life, and I've had this disability since the day I was born. So I don't know anything else. I mean, I
Yeah.
see what it looks like, but I don't actually know what it's like to walk off of an airplane. And so as frustrating as it is for me in the way that I have to travel or the way that I do travel, I don't know anything else. And so I almost think that's better because I just don't know. And ignorance is bliss. And I wouldn't even call it ignorance. But I think for me, it's all I know. And I've
Yeah.
adapted to the challenge because I've had to.
Yeah, that's really true as well. It was when you said that there are some things that you might need help with. I think that was like my ignorance because so I also have ADHD, so I'm super impatient. And if I have
Uh-huh.
to like wait to do anything, it frustrates me. And I
Yep.
know you have this kind of similar personality where you're like always on the go and wanting to do things. Um, but if, as you say, you haven't ever like been able to walk off a plane, like that's not something you've done. So of course that's not going to be as frustrating as that would be for me.
Right. 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 I will caveat the airlines and dealing with a wheelchair in the airlines will always be frustrating for me, but it's all I know. So it's, I don't know. I don't want to say ignorance is bliss because I'm not ignorant, but not knowing the other side of it, I guess, is bliss.
It's yeah, it's better than like yeah, it's better than the alternative. So I
Yeah.
think that's fantastic though that you did it all solo. Like I'm still scared of solo travel, so I
Well,
really think it's great.
to be clear, I still, when I get on an airplane by myself and I'm going across the ocean, I there are nerves in there. And when I get off and I go to immigration, every step of the way, there are nerves. But it's turned into a really exciting nervous. Like, oh my gosh, I can do this. I'm not
Yeah,
afraid anymore, in the sense that I was when I first started. But I'm
yeah.
I'm a solo female disabled traveler. There's
That's
definitely
badass.
yeah, there's definitely an underlying fear there. And if there wasn't,
Yeah.
then I think I would need to be more concerned.
I think that's really good to make that point that even though you've been to literally 144 countries, you've done this for however long now, you still get nervous to travel on your own. Like it's not something that goes away. I think a lot of people when they consider solo travel, they sort of look at it and then go, yeah, but I'm scared, so I'm not going to do that. And it's like, well, yes, we're all scared.
Hmm.
And some people kind of feel the fear and do it anyway.
Hmm. And it's worth it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's a brilliant point to make. Um, so kind of bring it back to our conversation then. If you, because you are like a proper inspiration. I like hope you, I don't want to embarrass you by saying that. When I say that, I feel like people are like, oh, but it's super inspiring. But I feel like there's not as many kind of travelers who are wheelchair users who would be as confident as you are. Because being scared and being confident, different things, right? Um,
Hmm.
would you give any advice to people who are looking to do it? Like, how can they get started?
Book your first trip.
Just do
Fight
it.
the fear. Yeah, just do it. I mean, I know that sounds really kind of touche of like, well, yeah, of course, I know that's the problem. I can't get over that hump of fear to book the first trip. I think know that I've been to 144 countries, and every single time I cross a border, there is some fear. There
Yeah.
is a huge amount of uncertainty. What is it going to be like if I can't get into the restroom? Or what if my hotel isn't accessible? What if, I need this and it's not there? Trust humanity. And I know that that's really hard for some people, myself included at times, but you have to trust humanity. There are 8 billion people on this planet, and the majority of them are really, really good and want to help.
Mm.
So trust that it will work out. Also, we live in a world where most of the time you can get cell phone signal or access to the internet. And so if you get to a hotel and it doesn't work, you can probably find another one that will. And just don't give up on it. But I mean this with all sincerity, if you do it a few times, you will start to realize that it is possible, and you're gonna have challenges along the way. Absolutely. Every traveler does. That's not specific to having a disability, but accept those challenges. If you need to take an afternoon to cry or scream in your hotel room, do that. Like the number of times that I have been in the bathroom of my hotel, like just screaming and raging and crying and all the emotions is, I mean, my family and friends, when they do travel with me and they see it, they're like, okay, she's having a hard time. But
Yeah.
it's okay. Like don't dismiss those feelings of fear and frustration. It's just fight through and overcome it. And I know that's not like solid advice, like here's the one thing you got to do, but it is just looking yourself in the mirror and say, I can do this.
Yeah, like that big hard conversation of like, come on,
Yeah.
big girl pants.
Well, and it is likely, depending on the disability, but it is likely that disability is not going to go away. And so you can choose to spend the rest of your life fighting the disability, or you can fight the fear.
Yeah, great advice. I think it applies to all travelers, like you said. And I think the reason that you and I can't necessarily give concrete advice is it really does differ for each person. Like perhaps, they can't use the same tips and tricks that you do because they have a different disability and a different experience, and that's all fine. But those things, like you said, they're not going away. So try, like, and I can't speak on that. I'm using your words, but
No, but you also, as a traveler, you've had your own moments of frustration
yes.
or fear, or you had said like you're so confident, and that is not something I would identify myself as. And I think sometimes you have to fake it till you make it, and pretend you're confident, because you are. Everybody is. If you are even thinking about getting out traveling, there's some part of you that's saying, I can do this. And
Mm.
so listen to that little quiet voice of like, I can do this, and not that really loud voice that's like, no, you can't do that. Like it's such a hard balance.
Yeah, it is. And for like I said, for me that I haven't done much solo traveling, like that's a bit of an exaggeration. Like I have traveled solo a few times. And I will say there is not one trip that I've gone on as a solo traveler where I've been like, yes, I'm so confident, like, watch me go. I am sorry, shitting myself the entire time. Like the whole time I'm like
Yeah,
panicking and I'm like, I can't do this, I can't do this.
yeah,
And I don't necessarily love that feeling. So I don't do it all the time. You can
no,
do it once, and if you hate it, if you really hate it, don't do it.
yeah, 100%. Absolutely. But try it, because that's the
Try
only
it.
way you're going to know. The other thing I would say, when you're traveling by yourself, if everything goes seemingly well and perfect, you can spout that off on social media. You can tell all your friends and family, I did this really cool thing and it was perfect. And if the next day everything just like falls to the ground and it's a disaster, everything you planned does not work, not a soul has to know about it.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said about, wow, I can tell them all the good things and nobody has to know the bad stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And on that note, what you see on social media, that is a highlight reel. Like people are
For
putting that up
sure.
there. Don't look at that and think I'm not good enough. I made a mistake. We all make mistakes.
For sure. I don't put my screaming in the bathroom mirror at the flight attendant who upset me. I don't put that on social media. So, yeah, you make a really good point.
Yeah, I mean, even for myself, I don't know if Kirsten's episode is going to come out before or after this one. I think probably before, but I have like ADHD and autism. So for me, things are really overwhelming. And that's like, obviously, it's very, very different from your experience. But there are days when, like, for some reason or whatever, my brain is like, no, 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 I don't like any of these things.
Yeah.
And I just like have a meltdown. And it's like, that's my life. I'm not going to go and put that on social media because there's no need to, but know that it happens and like be aware that we're all going through it at some point.
100%. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
And then the second part of my question that I was going to ask, obviously, like we said, there's going to be some wheelchair users listening to this and probably the majority not. So what would we say to people who are not wheelchair users, able-bodied people, whatever, who want to either help make it a bit easier or just behave differently when they're traveling? Like, what would we say to them?
So first, thank you for the question, and thank you for all the listeners who are like interested in that question. That's really cool. I think this is such a hard question to answer because again, there's such a spectrum of disabilities. So I also think it's hard for an able-bodied person to say, how can I help? Because they want a black and white answer. And I think the best way for them to help is to ask the individual,
Yeah.
can I help you? How can I help you? And the second part of that is listen to the individual. If they say, I don't need any help, they're saying that because they really don't need any help.
Yeah.
If they're saying, I need you to help me with my bag, they're saying it because they need help with the bag. Because the only person that can know what they need help with is the person needing the help. And so ask out of, genuine, authentic, caring reasons and respect what the person tells you.
Yeah. And in my experience, like of people with disabilities anyway, they tend to be very good at self-advocating and knowing like, I need this, I don't need this.
100%. Yeah. One of the most frustrating parts for me traveling is when someone assumes that I need help in a very specific way. And so one, maybe I don't need help. And then two, if I do need help, I'm telling you exactly what I need help with, how you can do it. And you're saying, no, that's not going to work. And it's incredibly frustrating because I've been doing this for 40 years. I know what works for me and what doesn't. And just listen. And if you listen, we can do this together and then we all feel good. Otherwise, I get frustrated, I get angry, and then they get angry, and it's not a good exchange.
Do you maybe have an example of that so people can kind of understand what you mean?
Sure. The airlines are a great one. I know we've talked a little bit about that. I think anyone that uses any sort of mobility device can relate to the airlines. The airlines are and look, I struggle with the airlines a lot because they have a huge responsibility to get people from point A to point B safely, and there's all the risks that go with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I understand that they're trying to do it safely and get people where they need to go. But if I tell you I don't need help getting on the airplane, or I don't want somebody carrying me on the airplane, which does happen in some parts of the world, not so much in Europe or in the United States, but if I tell them I don't need help with my bag, or I do need help with my bag, and I say I'm going to put my bag underneath my seat, and they say, no, no, it's best up above. Well, it's not best up above because I can't stand up to get it. So when the flight is you put my bag up there and I'm on a 10-hour flight, I can't get it down. So I am telling you, it's best for me to put my bag under the seat. And these are small little examples. But those types of things are they're little, but they make a big difference.
Well, yes. I mean, I don't think it's a small thing to say that you've told somebody that you can get somewhere on your own and then they physically lift you. Like that's quite invasive.
Yes, exactly. It's very invasive.
Yeah.
So those types of things are frustrating. Or you need to go down the ramp backwards instead of forwards, or it's hard for me to pinpoint the examples. It's the little things I think that gets me more than the big things.
Yeah. Well, I think that the most concrete advice that you gave was like ask them and treat them as treat them as a human being, for God's sake. Like
exactly.
It's ridiculous when you see somebody who clearly can advocate for themselves and either like in a restaurant or something like that, people are just not engaging them in the conversation. It's like, well, why are you speaking to this other person when you're asking a question about this person?
I have that was going to be my next point, and I have trained my family and friends because often I will be in parts of the world where someone will ask them and I'm sitting right there, and so I've trained them to respond back to the person, I don't know, why don't you ask her, she's sitting right here. And then they had this moment of oh my God, I've really messed this up. I don't know what to do. But it's just so frustrating because it's, I can hear everything that's happening. And like you said, treat them like a human being.
Yeah,
It's not a hard concept.
it's really not. It really
It's
shouldn't be. But
it's not.
I feel like I don't know if it's a cultural thing in different places or maybe it's just like a thing that we have in ourselves, but I do feel like there's sort of a sense of embarrassment in a lot of people of like, I don't want to offend or I don't want to come off better than this person or um I don't really
Mhm.
know because I don't tend to do it, but I see it, you know?
You see it, yeah, and it is cultural, and it goes back to you get to parts of the world where there aren't a lot of tourists, and the natural human inclination is just to treat this person like another human being. So
Mm,
I've spent a lot of time questioning, is this nature versus nurture? Is this because I do think that at the core of most human beings, there's this like we're all the same, and we might look different, we might do things differently, but really like we are kind of all the same.
yeah,
So there's, I think that coming from the Western world, there's a lot of advantages to that and a lot of privilege that comes with that. But there's also this cultural piece where we've evolved to a point where the disabled have a different, I don't even know what you want to call it, but they're treated differently.
yeah. Like a different social status almost.
Yeah, yeah, and I hate using that word because I
Yeah,
don't. And it's a difficult thing to articulate.
yeah.
But it's interesting.
Yeah, I think in the global north we're a little bit aware of our privilege and embarrassed by it all at once, and it can hold us back in lots of different
Hmm.
ways.
Hmm.
Um, and it is a shame when you see it like coming out in those kind of ways because, as you say, with so many advantages as a wheelchair user, I'm sure to living in somewhere like the US where you have access to advanced healthcare,
Hmm.
um, and all the accessibility that is in the States. But then
Yeah.
the downside is that maybe people don't necessarily treat you the way that you would be treated in other places, which is backwards, you know?
Yeah. And that's a perfect segue. I was going to say on the flip side, you get to some less developed countries and there are disabled people who don't leave their homes because they don't have access to the medical needs or the mobility devices that they need. So it's really a catch-22 of, okay, so I'm treated differently in the public, but I'm in the public. There are people in rural Africa that are stuck in their homes and they can't leave. So, which is better? And I take being in public and being treated differently day
Yeah.
over.
Yeah, and like you say, you get this incredible opportunity that, by being a traveler to go and educate and come back and say, well, I saw this and I did this and I
Mhm.
met these people and that's great. As a question I didn't have on my list for you, sorry, but have you actually met other disabled travelers in parts of the world where, who have been wheelchair users in places you might not have expected?
I have met a handful. Usually we don't speak the same language,
Hmm.
which is not surprising because in much of the world, the disabled population isn't granted or given, I'm not even sure what the right word is, but they're not maybe permitted to go to school.
Hmm.
And so learning English would be difficult, which is the language I speak. So I have met them, but it's usually more in passing.
Mm.
Um, I haven't met a ton in places that are a little more developed, but the ones I tend to gravitate to them because I think their stories are so fascinating, and I think the resilience of growing up with a disability or becoming disabled later in life in a place where you don't have access to the medical care is incredible, and it amazes me how these people can go on and not have access to public spaces to even leave their home or even to go to the toilet without the help of someone. So their stories of resilience are just amazing to me.
Yeah, it is really incredible how people can kind of thrive in those situations or even just like get by and survive. But I think I said to you when we first met that when I was living in Tanzania, there was a guy who I don't know what the problem was, but he had a skateboard instead of a wheelchair, and he used to
Mhm.
skateboard up and down the street like using his hands, which I just like honestly, as a 19-year-old living in Tanzania, coming from the UK, I was like, wow, like that's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
so resilient.
yeah, it is. But you also realize that resilient, creative, amazing, and that those are the stories I love because I think, gosh, like you have nothing and you found this skateboard and you're making it work. And then there's a part of me that when I'm in places like that and I encounter a situation like that, there's a part of me that is like, well, why me? And not in a like victim mode. Why me? Like, why am I so privileged to have been born where I was and have this incredibly fancy, expensive wheelchair? And this man who is just as worthy as using a skateboard.
Yeah.
And it's a really, you talk about privilege and feeling guilty, and it's just, why me? You know, why was I the lucky one? Why not him?
Yeah. And you're not the only person who feels that way. Like, definitely
Right.
can say
For
from
sure.
experience, I've had those thoughts as well. It's like a
Yeah.
very, it's a discomfort that we need to sit with sometimes, I think.
Yeah. And I think that applies not just from a, a wheelchair skateboard comparison, but just life, life in general,
Yeah.
and the inequality that this world has. And at the same time, we're all so much alike. This guy's on a skateboard, wants to go to the grocery store, so he's
Yeah.
going to the grocery store and he's doing it differently than I would.
Yeah. Yeah. It's super cool.
Yeah.
So that was all the questions I had. But I love this conversation. Do you have any other points you want to bring up to kind of the audience or anything else you wanted to say?
I don't think so. This has been amazing. So much fun.
It was so fun. I love chatting about. I feel like we just kind of got on so many tangents, but in a good way.
Yeah, it's
Um,
good.
so Renee, can you tell us what are you working on at the moment and where can people find you?
I am currently working on a book.
Cool.
I'm actually querying agents right now. I'm hoping to have that out in the next 12 to 18 months, hopefully closer to 12 months. I'm actually finishing a doctorate degree. So that is hopefully coming this year too. This is my like year of finishing all these things I started over the past couple years.
I was gonna say you're not
Um,
making it easy for yourself. Like
I
just
know, I
work
know.
in a degree.
I know, like, yeah, no big deal. And then I am working, I shouldn't say I'm working on. I have a children's book author. Her name is Virginia De Francisco, and she is writing a children's book about my story.
Oh,
And that will hopefully be coming out in the next 6 weeks or so. So
that's
I've
so
got a lot of just like
exciting.
fun stuff going on and a lot of storytelling, I guess, sharing some of my story and stuff. And it's just really fun. So lots of good stuff.
That's amazing. I know we have some families who listen to the show. So yeah, where can they find the book when it comes out, the children's book?
I will, it'll be on Amazon, but I will have a link on my webpage. My webpage is reneebruns.net. So first and last name.net. And all my social medias are out there too, but Wheels Travels is kind of my handle for most things. So if you go to Instagram and find Wheels Travels, you'll see me there. And then, like I said, reneebruns.net is my webpage.
Thank you so much. That's amazing. Thanks so much for coming on, Renee. Honestly, it's been brilliant. I'll wrap up now. So this has been the Sustainable Travel Podcast. You can find us on Instagram at the Sustainable Travel Podcast, or we also have a Facebook group, which is Sustainable Travel Tips Group. Please do not forget to like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. And thank you so much for listening.